Welcome to Drumbeats, the must-listen-to podcast which explains why Indigenous partnerships are the key to securing successful outcomes in natural resource and infrastructure investment in Canada. I'm Mark Magnacca, and my co-host Robert Brant and I are joined today by Jody Anderson, Vice President of Partnership Strategy and Public Affairs at the First Nations Finance Authority, who's leading groundbreaking work in Indigenous-led economic development across Canada. As a proud Anishinaabe Kwe from Treaty 3 and member of Couchiching First Nation, Jody brings a unique perspective to bridging Indigenous aspirations with mainstream capital markets. Her role at FNFA involves designing high-impact initiatives that unlock capital for First Nations communities, whilst delivering stable returns for institutional partners. Welcome to Jody Anderson, Vice President, Partnership Strategy and Public Affairs at the FNFA.
Hi, Jody. Great to see you again.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Rob. Great to see you both, and thanks for having me here today.
Thank you very much. We've had you at the most recent summit. We saw you in between there, and today back in London. So you've been traveling around quite a bit. And where are you today, Jody?
I am home here in Ottawa on the unceded and surrendered territory of the Algonquin people.
Well, that'll be a big discussion. How is Ottawa Hall still unceded territory? Right? That just demonstrates a lot of the issues that underline what we're talking about today, right?
Yes, sir. That's a whole other can of worms, Mark.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Anyway, Jody, tell us a little bit about yourself. Lots going on at FNFA. I know you're involved in other boards. Your charity work is a big part of what you do. But first, start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got through FNFA.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, it's an interesting journey on how I landed here, but one that's certainly not lost on me, and I reflect on it, quite often. I'm a proud member of Couchiching First Nation, which is located in Treaty 3, northwestern Ontario. But I grew up in a small town called Sioux Lookout, which is about 4.5 hours northwest of Thunder Bay. And so that's the world that I grew up in. Beautiful spot, incredible fishing, incredible community there. And I miss it dearly. Growing up, I always worked. I worked for the Ministry of Natural Resources. I was a radio operator, helping the teams when there was massive forest fires in and around the area. So spent a lot of time, out in the bush and out on the land, I guess is what it was. And that was really something that we grew up in and was quite natural to me. And I thought for the longest time that my career journey would lead me down the path to become or to go to school for forestry and something that was connected to the land. And in the late 90s, Mike Harris, who was a former premier of Ontario, did a number of cuts at the provincial level. And forestry was an area that was impacted significantly. And I thought, just as I was looking at post-secondary schools, maybe I should change my mind and look at something different. And so on a whim, I decided to apply into a business and commerce program, which I ended up following. After working with the Ministry of Natural Resources, I was really fortunate enough to be hired by CIBC into their Aboriginal internship program, which is what it was called at the time. And so that kind of helped me launch into the banking and finance world and really learn more about this area of finance, which, in my little world didn't exist. And banking to me was somewhere where you went and did your deposits and withdrew money at the ATM. And there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge beyond that. So when I was exposed to this world, it was fascinating to me in terms of the opportunities and, the training opportunities and how people manage their money, because it was just kind of a foreign concept, if you will. And so when I went to school, CIBC kept me on. I went to school in Peterborough, Ontario, which was a little bit of a balance between going to the big cities, a small town girl, and still having that bit of a balance of a smaller town. And so I was fortunate enough to work with CIBC and learn from other managers and mentors along the way. And from there, when I graduated, I had a choice of going to Toronto or I had a choice of going to Ottawa. And I chose Ottawa at the time, and I thought, oh, I'll go and try it for a year and see if I like it. And I was hired at the time into the high tech boom was going on in Ottawa, and it was exciting, and there was lots of things going on. So I followed that path and did human resource management at a high tech company for a few years. And while it was really interesting and I learned a lot and worked with some incredibly brilliant people, it was a big organization. There was thousands of people who worked there, and sometimes I felt like a number. And while I enjoyed the friendships that I made, I often questioned my impact on what I was doing. And in 2005, I think, I received a call asking if I would be interested in interviewing for this organization called the Aboriginal Financial Officers Association of Canada. And I knew nothing about them. And I did my homework and I did my research and really learned more about what the mandate of that organization was, including financial literacy and building capacity in with Indigenous communities right across Canada. And I thought, wow, I really like this idea. It reconnected me back to my kind of banking days, and I saw a lot of opportunity. And when I walked into that interview, it was Ernie Daniels who was interviewing me. And that was 20 years ago. 20 years later, I still work under Ernie's leadership, and he has afforded me great opportunities and has been an incredible mentor in terms of helping me navigate this world and this community, and has been a real beacon of light, not just for me, but for many people. And so when Ernie moved to the First Nations Finance Authority in 2011, I stayed at AFOA Canada and because he moved out west, and I said, well, keep me in mind, and if you ever expand in the east when it's time, don't forget about me. And he went out there. He still continued to be a mentor for those 7 years, and 7 years later, he called me up and said, do you think you would be open for a change and taking on a new challenge? And so we talked about it, and it was fascinating what they were doing. It was fascinating around the opportunities. And that was 7 years ago, and I've been with the FNFA ever since.
Wow. Just have to touch base. First of all, Ernie Daniels, we've been fortunate. He's joined our summit, been on a previous podcast with us, and he's obviously one of the leaders in this whole area, and a man of great reputation and insight and contribution. And as you said, been a mentor to many. But I have to come back, and we've talked about this before. Whenever you say Sioux Lookout, I just think, oh, wow, because we used to go in the summers from Toronto to Manitoba, and we drive up through Northern Ontario to get there. And we used to go by Sioux Lookout, and it was like, wow, such a whole different world. But it's one of those great names that resonate. And Rob, I think we're very fortunate on this podcast because we get so many Canadians, of course, but from all over the country, and all these names, I'm sure to most of our listeners here and in the city of London, thinking Sioux Lookout, Peterborough would ring a bell because there's a Peterborough here that I happen to live in, which is different than Peterborough there, but Sioux Lookout and all those places. And it just shows how diverse Canada is. And everybody has a unique experience growing up. And your story about how you made it to Ottawa, and probably the Senators have a greater chance than Leafs of winning the Stanley Cup. So it'll probably be another good reason to move to Ottawa. But Ottawa's a beautiful city that was chosen by Queen Victoria as the capital, Ottawa Hall, to settle the issue of should the capital be in what was Upper Canada versus Lower Canada. And now you're there working for the First Nations Financial Authority. That's a wonderful story, and your career to date.
From forestry to capital markets.
Yes.
My daughter-in-law is working in Northern Ontario right now, a big forestry project, and went to school and studied forestry management will be interested to listen to your podcast, this podcast, and your story.
Timing is everything.
Yes.
It's a really interesting journey. And Northern Ontario at this time of year, I've some great memories of lakes and time of the land. Do you get back very often? I know you're still involved with Couchiching First Nation.
Yes. Yeah, I am, Rob. And I try to get back as often as I can, try to participate in as many community activities as I can from here. I'm a trustee on Couchiching's Legacy Trust. And so part of, my mantra is to look at ways to give back. How can I connect with my community and what value can I bring to the table that they're willing and open to receiving? And so to me, that's capacity in terms of, knowledge transfer or helping out wherever I can and going back for their powwows. And we still have family on reserve. So going to visit family, of course, is a wonderful opportunity. So whenever I get the opportunity to go up north or go home, I relish that. And it is truly an incredible spot to be. Lake of the Woods and Lac Seul. And if you are a person that loves to fish, there's no better place in Canada, in my opinion. And they're just gems.
That's for sure. Can you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about powwows? And you've mentioned that, and we discussed that before.
It's
but
powwow season, summertime.
Yes,
it is. It's powwow season, and you often hear people talking about the powwow trail and what does that mean. And it's really an opportunity for communities to celebrate culture and heritage and dance and movement and the regalia that people spend so much time and effort making and pouring their hearts into, and ensuring that it's reflective of who we want to be. There was a time when powwows and potlatches were banned from happening under the Indian Act. So it's important that we bring back and continue to celebrate those sacred ceremonies, teach our kids to dance. You're never too old to dance. I'm trying to learn how to dance. Yeah. Technology has been a wonderful thing in terms of people sharing their talents. And I'm in the process of, making my own ribbon skirts now, which is something that I didn't grow up learning how to do. But spending time with people from community who can help and guide and mentor in that specific area, I think is incredible. But each community tends to have an annual powwow where people come home from all over the place, other communities to celebrate, visit with families, enter into these dance competitions, hearing the drums, hearing the music, etc. So it really is an incredible time, and you can spend your entire summer going from community to community, participating or watching in different powwows, and it's truly beautiful.
Yeah, I'll be at ours at Magnacca in just a couple of weeks.
Okay, a couple of weeks left to keep that in mind.
Yeah. And look forward to connecting, seeing family and friends, and also the food. Don't forget the food.
Oh, yes. The food is definitely one of the highlights.
I'm envious. I'm over in London. I'm not sure where I'm going to do, but I certainly won't enjoy a powwow like that. That's for sure. So why don't we come back a little bit about First Nations Financial Authority and some of your recent achievements. I think you've now reached over 2 billion Canadian in financing, or why don't you give us an update? 3 now.
Yeah, we're closing in on 4, Mark.
Wow. Okay, yeah. I've been behind for a few months.
That's okay. That's okay.
Closing in on 4. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit again about FNFA and where it sits in the framework, and how a foreign investor or those who have subsidiaries in Canada might end up working with either Indigenous nations with FNFA or through FNFA.
Sure. It's a great question. So the First Nations Finance Authority is a not-for-profit statutory institution that exists under the First Nations fiscal management framework, along with three other institutions, sister institutions, which we all operate independent of one another, but offer tools and options for First Nation communities right now. And right now, the mandate of FNFA is really to provide short and long-term financing opportunities for bands that exist under the Indian Act. We also can provide investment options and capital advisory services to nations that wish to engage. So under those kind of three mandate or bullet points, there's a number of areas that we work with First Nations right across Canada. And essentially, nations can come to us either utilizing own source revenue that they have existing already to leverage to access capital through the capital markets. And FNFA now has been able to obtain 3 credit rating opinions from S&P, or Standard & Poor's, Moody's Investor Service, as well as Morningstar DBRS, which allows us to work within the capital markets and issue bonds. So what we do is we have a short-term commercial paper program, or if Mark First Nation wants to come to us and borrow for a project in their nation, they can do so. They can access that capital immediately. And once we can build up a number of projects and loans, we pool those together and then go to the capital markets to sell that debt. And we work with institutional investors. We work with all of the big 5 banks, plus some smaller folks through our banking syndicate, who have really opened doors for investors right across the world now who are buying our debt. And we've been able to establish an incredible reputation and level of comfort with our investors, where that when we go to issue a bond now, it's oversubscribed. So there's more buyers than we have debt to sell, which, it's a great signal of comfort, and that that investors understand what it is that we're doing. They're very interested in the Indigenous market, very interested in, what else is that investors can do to participate, or whether it's through their reconciliation strategies or plans, whether it's a reflection of ESG investing and performative performance targets. We're constantly getting interest from not just Canadian investors, but like I said, from all over the world now, which has really allowed us to grow, scale, and pass those savings and those benefits over to the community. So because we're a not-for-profit, we can pass those savings directly over to our First Nation members, which is extraordinary. So our members are often accessing capital at rates well below bank prime or other places that they would have been accessing debt historically.
It's impressive, Jody. Remind us, what is the credit rating these days of your long-term debt?
We're sitting at about a AA and a stable from Moody's Investor Service, and an R1 through our commercial paper program, mid-stable, and again, AA with S&P. So we're regarded very stable within the investment community. We work very closely with the credit rating agencies so that we maintain that relationship. We're priced very close to the province of Ontario, which is a great, a great thing to be able to say at this point. So we have received a number of different credit rating increases. Even throughout COVID, we actually received a credit rating increase, which was quite rare to see during that time. So,
well, AA is fantastic. That's equivalent to our biggest banks in Canada, and they have AA ratings.
That's right. So our big boss says that he wants to get to a AAA rating That's what we're trying to achieve, so our members can enjoy the benefits of cheaper capital. So we're striving to do that with the work that we're doing.
Just a question: when you refer to your members, is this similar to a mutual structure or a credit union structure, or how do First Nations participate?
It's a good question. So what was very important to our leadership when this act was being contemplated and designed and the drafting of the legislation was happening was that this act, although it's federal, was to never be imposed on any First Nation. It was that it is optional for First Nations to participate. So they can put their hand up and say, yes, I want to be a part of this. But they also have the benefit to put their hand up and say, this isn't right for me at this time. We're going to opt out of it so that, we're not forcing anybody into this, and where that this regime actually acts as another tool in the toolkit that nations can utilize for projects or for other circumstances. And I want to be clear, because it's not just FNFA and access to capital. There's another institution, our sister institution, which is the First Nations Financial Management Board, who works with the nations to build capacity. And that's really unique in and of itself, where that, we heard for many years that we were just getting consultants or folks coming in and just doing the work and leaving. But when they left, our communities were still left without the capacity to manage. And so that was really important, that worked in parallel with the communities and meeting communities where they're at to establish financial practices and policies, and to strengthen governance and to strengthen their financial administration, so that 10, 15 years down the road, that capacity and those tools still existed internally for communities to work from.
Yes, and I remember at the Commonwealth Trade and Investment Summit that you attended, Jody, there was a lot of interest in terms of from other nations, other members of the Commonwealth. How does this work and set up? Everybody was like, we want to learn more. So obviously what's been achieved is something not just relevant for Canada, but other nations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting, this has been a really instrumental year in terms of kind of breaking into a global stage, if you will, Mark. And certainly through the investment summit has been a catalyst for us, for sure. FNFA is unique where that there's no other institution in the world that exists like FNFA, and we're getting calls and requests across the world to tell us, how did you do it, and what can we do to get started? And so we've been talking with a lot of other nations to help other Indigenous communities to look at, okay, this is where we started, this is what worked for us, this is what we've learned along the way, etc., so that we can see this success not just within Canada, but globally.
And give us an idea. There's lots happening at FNFA, and you're deploying capital loans, you're issuing bonds. But any recent projects you're most proud of?
Yeah, the ones that are in the pipe I can't talk about right now, but we'll be hearing about some more exciting projects coming out very soon. But I think that, if I look back and reflect on the past 7 years, Rob, there's been some extraordinary projects that they keep getting more significant, or the small ones are just as exciting as the larger ones. And I know people talk about the Clearwater transaction. That was a very big deal and really set the tone for pooling purchasing power right across the country. And we saw a shift after that transaction took place, because it involved a coalition of 7 Mi'kmaq communities, and one where they could rightfully get into an industry that they had participated in for years. So not only was this a financially meaningful transaction, but it also reflected the values and the culture of the communities that were involved. So that was definitely a big one and turned a lot of heads. But
remind us, that was the acquisition by the Mi'kmaq Syndicate of a 50% stake in Clearwater Seafood's business.
That's right. And we helped them finance the purchase of I think it was 24 lobster licenses, which is, you know, the government isn't issuing licenses anymore. You can get into that industry, but you have to kind of buy into it, and that's really the only way now. So there's significant value in those licenses, but it was transformative for 7 communities. And at that point, that was during COVID. So that was really interesting. And I think we issued that transaction and, timed it in the markets where that community, we could lock in a rate for 10 years of 1.9%. And when you're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars, that's a extraordinary rate that I don't know that we'll see again for a very long time. So allowing budget certainty for the communities and access to generational wealth and transaction is transformative. But we've also taken place or been able to participate in the Haisla LNG, the Cedar LNG facility that the Haisla First Nation has embarked on. And, it's not lost on us that we can help the communities come in as the financiers and participating in the finance, but it truly is the communities that do all the heavy lifting, because a lot of these transactions take years and years. And it's often the vision of many leaderships right across Canada who have wanted certain things for many years. Now they have the tools to be able to execute and access, because, previously or historically, when we were accessing capital, it was prime plus 2, 3, 4, and often more %, which makes a lot of these projects non-viable. So to have the opportunity to access affordable capital is transformative. Allows the nations to participate in economic development and transfer that wealth back to the community, invest in infrastructure and all these good things that our communities so badly need. But you get these big economic development ones. But I also, love the story of Temagami First Nation, where they built a new 12-unit home for their elders to come home. And so they never had that opportunity to welcome home their elders, and also built a multi-use facility where they could go right next door to participate in cultural activities or community kitchens and, things like that. Those things are so meaningful and impactful to our communities. And it truly helps rebuild a nation and revitalize our culture.
Yes, because historically your elders would stay in the community, right? So this gives them, at the end of their lives, actually they now see the fruits of economic and social reconciliation, which they did not benefit from during most of their lives. So that's nice, but it also brings it back in the community. So you have that intergenerational experience going on for the young people who can see their elders are here, and all those stories and learnings and everything are passed on. I love being close to my grandparents. And that's why I went back to Manitoba every summer. But to have them in the community as the communities are being empowered is really, as you say, transformative. I guess one of the other things, obviously, on everybody's mind, we have a new Prime Minister in Canada, Mark Carney, and the government working with the provinces and with the First Nations are trying to drive things forward. So can you, without, of course, going into any of the detail, how do you see this moment for the country and First Nations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think if you ask 5 different people, you may get 5 different answers on, what the perception is. And I think Prime Minister Mark Carney has a big job to do right now. There's a lot of changes geopolitically, of course. There's always work to be done when there's a change in government, a federal government or provincial government for that matter, here in Canada. And Mark Carney has to, balance the objectives and the mandates of his government that he has set out, but he also is learning and will continue to learn. It is a learning journey for everybody to listen and include, co-develop with our Indigenous nations. And I think that's the message that is coming out of a lot of the nations across Canada. Nations are very interested in development. We're interested in participating in economic development and and seeing progress, not just within our own nations, but across Canada as a whole. But there's expectations and responsibilities that come along with that in terms of consultation and listening to those rights holders who really are the communities in terms of how they wish to participate. And a lot of these projects will be identified as priorities for our nation. So it will be interesting. Dialogues continue to happen. I'm hopeful, that I think Mark Carney is a very smart businessman and understands the power of negotiation and the power of listening to come with a win-win opportunity. So I'm always an optimist, thinking that good things will prevail.
That was my question, Jody. Are you optimistic? Can we find a way to do these transactions, these projects, in a more efficient way, in a faster way? Investors in Canada and around the world would all like to see that, but at the same time respecting rights holders and consultation processes, because these projects have a big impact, especially on Indigenous communities who will live with the effects for forever in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. I think that, whether we look at any of the priorities, whether it's projects of national interest, whether it's climate change, the path to execution and success is through in our Indigenous territories. So it's really not an option not to engage. And I am optimistic because we need to think differently. We need to be more innovative, and we certainly need to be more efficient in terms of how we're approaching these projects. Because I think that, if we're not, the result is that timelines are not met and costs are overblown. And, there is a way to be more expedient and more efficient and meet those expectations of consultation and FPIC and all these important things that are critical to our communities. So I am optimistic, but it takes time, right? A true partnership just it takes a lot of work.
I wanted to ask Jody a little bit about your podcast, Let's Bond. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. It's different for me to be on this side of the podcast table, although it's fun. And yes, FNFA, we have a podcast called Let's Bond, and we bring in community members to talk about their projects or some of the challenges that they're seeing or have encountered, and sharing solutions to some of the things that they have experienced. I'm sure Chief Derek App. He has an incredible episode where he talks about Chiacdil's housing project that we were fortunate enough to participate in, and the impact that that's had on his community and elders and young folks having homes for the first time. So we look at things like housing, we look at things like insurance, we look at, the history of FNFA and some of the original leaders that helped stand up this organization. And then we talk about, what's coming down the pipe. What other new innovative tools are we looking at? And it's important for us to hear from the people that we work with and to truly listen to what's happening in communities. Because if we're not listening, then I think we're going in the wrong direction. And certainly our approach has always been to truly hear and listen to our communities so that we can develop and design tools that work when our communities need it. We would love to have you guys on that podcast, by the way.
We'd be happy to be there. That would be great. I just, a comment from all the podcasts that we're doing, and both of you are Indigenous. You can feel the 7 generations thinking coming through, that you're thinking, what is the impact down the road? And it's not separate from the community. It's part of it. So many of us, we're in the UK, or Rob and I have both been here, and, they talk about different projects and there's environmental assessments, but you don't feel that deep sort of ownership and concern for what does this mean down the road. So that really, really comes through. But I also think just a separate point, the scale of the opportunity and challenges in front of Canada. So China just announced earlier today, President Xi, or yesterday, a huge 170 billion dam in the Himalayas that is now going to be the focus of the effort. And I forget how much concrete the reference was. And, in the UK, they will get that done. They have a different system of government, obviously. In the UK, we've had something called HS2, and we've already spent, $35 billion on it, and it's not going to get completely done. So every country is facing these challenges in terms of development, infrastructure, and energy projects, and how to make things happen. And I remain, as Rob knows, an optimist on this, that I think Canada's going to find something very unique about how to work with the rights holders, which are usually the Indigenous people in Canada, along with settlers and those who are new to the country, to come up with a model to provide a model of how a society should work in the world we live in. We're all on planet Earth, and hopefully we achieve, here's how you can actually do it. Leveraging the millennia of knowledge and traditions, as well as the best practices and how you get things happen and deliver them and provide returns to investors, which is very important in the world we live in. So I really enjoy these podcasts. So I enjoy Let's Bond too, and we'll feature some of those as well and talk to our investors about what they can benefit from that. But it's been absolutely great having you with us today, Jody. Really special, as always, to have a conversation with you.
Thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure, and I enjoy our discussions, Rob and Mark, and could probably chat for another hour very easily. So, thanks for inviting FNFA and allowing us to share our story. Thank you for inviting us to your summit, which I can't wait for the next one. We've been finding it extremely beneficial for us in terms of sharing our story, but meeting other folks that can help us achieve the goals and what we're trying to do here in Canada. So well timed.
Yes. Yeah. Thanks for joining us, Jody. Thanks for your time. Always great to catch up. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Congratulations on everything that the FNFA has been able to achieve today.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Mark.
We'll be watching the news, so thank you very much. Thank you to Jody Anderson for sharing your insights with us, and thank you for viewing and listening. Be sure to share, subscribe, and leave a review on your favorite podcast channel. Thanks for listening to Drumbeats. Until next time.